Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship has the best cafeteria I have ever seen. The kind of cafeteria that would put even the most advanced tech campus to shame. The cafeteria is the second largest building on campus, second only to the arena. There isn't just one five-star chef on staff, but 7 chefs, 7 kitchens, and some of the most detailed meal plans for each student. While most students' meal plans would be at least a dozen pages, it isn't unheard of for some students to have meal plans that are hundreds of pages long for the chefs and line cooks to examine closely before they ever get close to cooking for the students. From the outside, this might seem like a massive waste of resources and time, until you realize that Agamemnon is trying to build a powerful army from his students. Food is an essential part of building both loyalty and strength. During the Great War, nearly 75% of all drafted soldiers were considered unfit for service due to malnutrition permanently affecting their strength. So, Agamemnon's had the best food available, better than any that could be obtained elsewhere. So desperate families knew that they could trust Agamemnon's to keep their children fed and healthy. And the students would always start with a positive association towards Agamemnon because they were well fed. However, that is only part of the story. While good nutrition should be reason enough, there has been a few incidents in the history of Agamemnon's that made it very clear to both the staff and Agamemnon himself that deliberate food plans couldn't just be about getting nutrition for the children. There had to be another form of control and another way of keeping the children from harming the staff. An often unspoken part of raising powerful children into being villains is how do you keep them from turning on you? In truth, there is no one way to keep every child from ever turning on their teachers. Some children will turn on their teachers when they feel deprived of something. Others attack because they think they are stronger than the teachers. And others still attack because they feel they have everything they need and they just desire even more. And then there are those who attack their teachers not of their own free will, but because of the nature of their own abilities, turn on everyone around them. There is a reason these stories are still shared among the staff of Agamemnon's. The first incident that told Agamemnon it was time to change was a long time ago, when there was a new student from the kingdom of Hawaii. His name? Nanaue, Prince of Hawaii, heir to the throne, and Vavasor to the Pacific warlord. Exactly the kind of student that Agamemnon would benefit from by having him as a student. His mother agreed to let him study at the school, but she gave Agamemnon a strict rule that Nanaue would need to follow while at the school. He would not be allowed to eat meat of any kind. Agamemnon agreed to these terms, and Nanaue began his studies at Agamemnon's, and he picked up his lessons quickly, and in the arena his strength was unrivaled by his classmates, and even Agamemnon himself struggled against Nanaue's strength. And Nanaue was only 10 years old at the time, and Nanaue would only eat vegetarian meals in the cafeteria. Although it did not take long for others to notice a few quirks of the prince. Like when Nanaue thought he was alone, he would oftentimes talk to himself, which is not too unusual, especially in Agamemnon's. Clever students tended to talk to themselves. Such was just the way of things. However, what was not normal was the fact that Nanaue would answer himself. and he would speak with a voice that was not his own voice, a voice that would speak even when his mouth was covered. One day, during gym class, another student stole Nonaway's shirt from his locker. So after Nonaway's class, he would have to walk back to his own room to grab another shirt. And as he walked through the school, everyone could see that on Nonaway's back was a second mouth, a wide mouth that smiled from between the shoulder blades, a mouth that had sharp, serrated teeth like the teeth of a shark, that made anyone who looked at the mouth uncomfortable, like the mouth would eat them if they got close to the teeth. After Nonaway grabbed his shirt, no one dared to try bully him nor steal from him again. Few things motivate people to leave you alone than being scared of you. A lesson at Agamemnon's academy, a lesson taught both in class and outside of the class. So at first, this pleased Agamemnon, a lesson for his students for free, and he would have access to a new domain of diplomacy and politics. And it did not matter to him that no one spoke to Nonaway as a friend anymore. Halfway through the year, as Nonaway grew lonelier, there came time for the camping trip for his class. A month-long trip in the infinite forest where the students would learn outdoor skills and how to camp. A time-honored tradition that was rumored to go back to the days of the Bronze Age collapse. Nonaway, as one of the students, was also included in the camping trip, and Agamemnon told the teacher in charge, an ex-military drill sergeant named Ranger, that Nonaway needed to eat a completely vegetarian diet. Whether Ranger disregarded Agamemnon's warning because he believed students needed to toughen up on the trip, or because he simply didn't like vegetarians, or because he just assumed he knew better than Agamemnon, that was known only to Ranger, who mandated on the camping trip that only food that was caught, fished, or hunted could be eaten on the trip. The first night, Ranger was the only one who ate, as he cooked fish that he fished up from the river, more than enough fish for all the students there, as Ranger cooked all of the fish before he ate his own fill, and he threw the rest of the fish into the fire in front of the students. In horror, they watched as the fish blackened and burned in the fire, and they could smell the fish, but they could never eat it. It was said that Ranger was looking directly at Nonaway when he spoke these words. The world is a selfish place. Expecting anyone to be selfless is only ever to end in disappointment. If you want to survive, then learn to fight for yourself. Feed yourself and care for yourself. You feed yourselves out here, you set up your own tents, and, most importantly, Ranger then suffocated the fire, leaving the students in the dark and cold. You make your own fire, he told them before he went to his tent with a full stomach and confidence that he gave his students a valuable lesson as they too went to their sleeping bags. The students had not even set up their tents yet because they did not know how to set them up, and Ranger refused to teach them. He believed that they would learn by themselves and that he was just there to make sure they didn't fuck each other up too much. The next morning, Nonaway figured out how to set up his own tent. The first one to figure out how to set up their tent. And once he figured out how to set up his own tent, he began to help his classmates with their tents. When Ranger saw this, he grew angry. He had seen many different people in his time in the imperial military, and he knew the kind of person Nanaue would grow up to be. If he did not break the prince of this habit quickly. I see you weren't listening last night, so let me make this clear for you, Ranger said as he pulled the stakes out of Nonaway's tent, and he then removed the poles, taking them into his tent, leaving Nonaway only his tent fabric to act as a blanket or sleeping bag. You set up your own tents, you get your own food, you fend for yourself, and you set up your own fire. You're cheating your classmates out of a valuable lesson by helping them set up their tent, he said with his arms crossed, and he figured Nanaue would stop his feeble attempt to help his fellow classmates. Instead, Nanaue continued to help his classmates set up their tent, and now, even angrier, Ranger had his answer. Everyone, take down your tents. Now, he said in a tone that said he was to be listened to. And as all of the tents were taken down, he gathered everyone around Nanaue, and he made it clear he was going to be listened to. Everyone, Nanaue has so kindly volunteered to set up the tents for everyone. After all, how selfish would it be for Nanaue to only help a few out? He said to the class, who laughed at his words, and Nanaue's face turned red in embarrassment. One of the lessons taught in Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship was that the philosophy of heroism was inherently flawed and self-destructive. If you chose to help anyone, then you were obligated to help everyone. When you are supposed to be selfless, then you can never care for yourself because you had to care for everyone else first, which no one could ever do indefinitely. And Agamemnon would break the sense of sharing and caring of every student. For most, it was just enough to encourage selfishness, but for some, you had to discourage selflessness. Every action had to be done to serve your own self in some way, or it had to be done in exchange for something else, or the expectation that you would be getting something out of helping someone else. Usually money, favors, or something of great political value. And now Ranger was punishing Nanaue for helping some of his classmates by forcing him to help everyone. But while Nanaue is setting up tents, let's go find some food, Ranger told the students as they dispersed into the wilds, leaving Nanaue alone with all of the tents to set them up by himself. When Ranger returned with the other students, all of whom brought back various wild blackberries, squirrels, and fish that they brought back themselves, only to see that Nanaue set up all of the tents. And he rebuilt the fire pits, and the fire was already burning, and Nanaue stood there with pride and his arms crossed. His own personal efforts made it so the camp was in a better place than when Ranger left, making the camp a better place for everyone, and this only made Ranger angrier. He expected to see Nanaue upset and tired when he got back, not someone who seemed proud to be punished. So Ranger knew he had to make his point even clearer. Thank you for your kind efforts. I am sure your pride will keep you warm while you sleep outside tonight, Ranger said as he took down Nanaue's tent again, and this time he threw the tent fabric into the fire, which took time to burn, but when it did, it left Nanaue with no tent for the rest of the month. Whether any of the other students thought it was fair or unfair did not matter. Anyone who would have spoken up would have made themselves a target. If anyone offered to share a tent, they would have lost their tent. And if anyone offered food to Nanaue, they would have to give up everything they had. And even if someone wanted to help him, They didn't want to hurt themselves by doing so. Any heroism inside of them was broken a long time ago out of a sense of self-preservation. That night, while everyone else ate, sang, and told stories around the fire, Nonoway, the 10-year-old prince, was kept out in the cold while his teacher tried to break his heroic heart. The next day, Nonoway went hunting with the other students and Ranger. While they hunted, Nonoway asked if he could gather berries, only to be denied as Ranger told Nonoway it was time for hunting and not gathering. When Nonoway begged Ranger to let him gather berries for himself, Ranger only scoffed. He did not care that this 10-year-old boy had not eaten in 3 days, and that he was not supposed to eat meat. Ranger was an imperial through and through. Hawaiian custom and culture were less than a barbarous superstition, while his own custom and culture were irreproachable. That night Nonoway went hungry yet again, staring at the food eaten by everyone else, while he was stuck in his own head, listening to the voice that came from his back. A voice that only got stronger the hungrier he got. A voice that whispered to him while he was alone in the dark. While everyone else ate, he listened to the voice inside of him that he spent his entire life trying to ignore. Just eat the meat. You can go back to not eating meat tomorrow. If you get any hungrier, you won't be able to leave your sleeping bag in the morning. If you starve, you'll die. If you die, who will lead you home? The voice implored in Nonoway's mind, his mother's lessons and voice growing weaker in his head, while the voice on his back grew stronger. One of the hardest things about leading is denying yourself pleasures, not because the pleasure is bad, but because it can cause a frenzy. There are foods we will never taste. There are drinks we will never swallow. There are songs we will never hear. When you choose to lead, there is a lot you choose to leave behind. Power comes at a cost, and this is part of it. We do not consume blood, so we never become bloodthirsty. We do not threaten, so we never become threats. We do not act unjustly, so we never become unjust. Her words echoed through Nonoway's mind before they were forgotten, under the words of the mouth on his back. Ye cannot be right. You alone try to be just, and look where it got you. Hungry, old, and alone. Everyone else can threaten, and they are not treated like threats. You just walked without a shirt, and everyone treated you like a threat. Is that just? Everyone else has a full belly, and they do not thirst for blood. So why do you starve yourself? For a foolish ideal that will get you killed. The voice whispered to Nonoway as he finally gave in and decided to eat meat. While everyone was eating and talking, it was easy for Nonoway to sneak a plate for himself. A plate that sat next to one of his classmates as he took it back to his dark corner of the woods. He did not know what meat it was, not on the dark, and certainly not by the smell. He could see that it was gray, with some burnt fat on the edges, as he lifted it to his mouth and he chewed on the dry, tough meat. In that moment, it was the best thing Nonoway had ever tasted in his life. It was like he was missing something his entire life, and now he had it for the first time ever. It was like his heart was beating for the first time. His eyes felt like they were seeing colors for the first time, and he became aware of the sounds in the woods. He could hear every cricket, every squirrel, and every bird that flew by. and he could smell the sweet and savory blood on his classmates' plates. And that was paltry compared to the meat he could smell on his classmates' bones. Nonaway could feel every electrical charge from their nerves. He could smell their breath, and he could practically taste their warm blood on his tongue. But not the tongue in his head. For the first time in Nonaway's life, the mouth on his back licked his back, and Nonaway could taste his own salty sweat and his delicious skin. And he knew deep in his bones that if he did not feed the mouth on his back, that it would turn on him just as easily. So he removed his shirt, and he fed the maw on his back, that whispered to him as the tongue got even longer, and was now licking Nonaway's neck. More, the mouth whispered, and by this point the only voice Nonaway could hear or understand was the one on his back. He just knew that he hungered, and as delicious as the flesh he ate was, he knew deep inside of him that the maw on his back was craving the flesh of the humans. He did not even notice that he no longer thought of himself as human, and he did not think of his classmates and teacher as people anymore. They were food, and Nonaway was hungry. The first person Nonaway attacked was Ranger. No one knows if he attacked Ranger because he was the only threat in the group, if he attacked Ranger as a form of revenge, or if he attacked Ranger because he was the most meat. What is known is when Nonaway attacked Ranger, his skin was gray and armored as his teeth tore out Ranger's neck, and the gaping maw on his back tore into Ranger's arm, far too quickly for Ranger to defend himself or try to use his own power against Nonaway. As Ranger called out for his class to help, all of the lessons came to a head as the students saw the monster tear their teacher apart. A dozen 10-year-olds who were taught that acting as a hero would only get them killed, or that helping someone would only bring them pain, watched as someone was hurt, and they did what their teacher taught them to do when someone needed help. They all turned away and ran. When morning would come, the students would make it back to school safely. However, Ranger would not. It is not known what was going through his mind as he was torn apart by Nonaway. Did he feel ashamed that his students ran away instead of helping? Did he feel fear from being eaten by a monster he did not understand? Did he think that his students were cowards for running away from danger? Or was he full of pride because they had finally become what the Academy so desperately desired? Selfish survivors who would survive no matter how harsh the world was, because they would always be crueler than the world. If there were any heroic hearts in that forest that night, they died with Nonaway's hunger. And to this day, Nonaway still hunts in the infinite forest, eating any living creature that runs across his path. But the flesh he desires far more than any other is the flesh of humanity. And this story is still told in the Academy to remind teachers why it's important to follow the meal plan. A few years after the Nonaway incident, there was another promising student, this time from Garden City. A daughter of a wealthy businessman who ran Rose University. A young woman named Enola, who dreamt of being a great warrior with the skills learned at Agamemnon's academy. Enola had a specific taboo that no meat could be mixed in her meals. So meat from the air had to be eaten with meat from the air. Flesh from the water could only be eaten with flesh from the water, and beasts from the earth could only be eaten with beasts from the earth. A fairly straightforward taboo, a fairly straightforward meal plan where every day the student could only have one type of meat or meat product per day. At least it was a straightforward way of making the meals. All it took to mess up Enola's life was a trade of shifts, and now Enola's cook did not work on Enola's meal, and the substitute line cook did not bother reading over the meal plans. He just figured whatever plans the school had in effect would be fine to be ignored for a day, as long as the food was fully cooked. So the line cook made chicken fried rice along with shrimp on top to provide to Enola. The line cook did not think about it at all, as he handed the bowl to Enola, who took the bowl back to her own quiet area of the campus. Students didn't have to eat inside of the cafeteria, so Enola went to where she could eat in peace, in a quiet hallway in one of the empty buildings during the lunch period. Inside of the building, while Enola was alone, she ate her lunch, and so there was no one to see what happened to her as she ate. It was noticed that Enola had not returned to class. Academy security investigated her last known location, and it was there, down at the end of a quiet hallway. They found the remnants of Enola's backpack, uniform, and homework was scattered across the hallway, with a trail of blood, shredded skin, and gore that led to a janitor's closet. When the staff opened the door, they saw what was left of Enola. Just beyond the door were long webs that formed a funnel deeper into the darkness of the closet. Most of the concrete was already broken, and there was a little nest built in the middle of the closet with a human heart inside. A heart that was still beating and pumping blood into the dirt and concrete from the heart, soaking into the ground. The blood never seemed to stop flowing from the heart, and as terrifying as the heart was, it was not the worst thing that was inside of the closet. Behind the heart was the gigantic spider that spun the webs. The spider had legs that were at least 2 meters long, with a body that was 1 meter long. The legs were covered in a coarse, sharp fur that cut into the concrete as the legs scuttled closer to the body, protecting the spidery body. The spider's abdomen was brown and furry, like a tarantula with a large brown stripe. The eyes of the spider were 8 human eyes, the same hazel eyes of Enola, that pleaded with the security staff, that begged them for help as she tried to reach towards them. To the sides of her leaking, salivating fangs were human arms that replaced the pedipalps of the spider. As Enola reached out one of her arms towards the guards, they quickly slammed the door to the janitor closet to keep her locked inside of the closet. They then soon bricked it up, and she remains there to this very day. Where Enola would remain alone, confined in the dark with only her own eternally bleeding and beating heart to keep her company. Her parents would never know that their daughter remained alive and trapped They were only told that she got herself lost in the infinite forest, and they would try to find her in the infinite forest. Well, Enola remained still in prison in Agamemnon's academy for accelerated apprenticeship. It is said if you travel down a quiet hallway, you can hear her trying to scratch away at the locked door and brick to try and escape. And maybe she is still alive, or maybe she has starved to death a long time ago. But Agamemnon is not opening that door to find out. And with the lesson that meal plans are to be followed no matter what, it leads to our most recent story. A success story by Agamemnon standards, one that makes it clear to the cooking staff that a successful meal plan makes all of the difference. There was a student from Kemet, one named Sakmis, a physically powerful student who got into the school with her own athletic scholarship. And it became clear to Agamemnon and to everyone else that Sakmis only had one passion in life. Her entire purpose in life was to draw blood and consume it. In Kemet, the most she could hope for was to get work as a mercenary in Phoenicia Maquilis, but more likely than not, she would just be another serial killer stalking the streets and rivers of Kemet, always trying to slack her bloodthirst and always failing. A life that would have ended with her dead sooner rather than later. In Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship, they gave Sakmis socially acceptable murders. People she could kill and get rewarded for it. People she could kill that wouldn't be missed. And people that were putting the Academy at risk. What Agamemnon did not anticipate was that her thirst would only grow worse and worse with time and deaths. Sakmis could kill a dozen men in one night, drinking all of their blood from their screaming bodies and sleeping among their dead bodies, and the next day she would wake up desiring to kill even more than she did before. And even though the Academy always had more enemies, or more people they considered disposable, they also knew in time her bloodlust would grow so bad that she would attack Agamemnon and his staff just because they were there. So they created a plan to help control the blood-crazed Sakmis. The day they didn't need anyone killed, they offered her beer that was dyed red to resemble blood. And sure enough, she drank the beer just as greedily as if it was blood. She drank the beer by the liter, and by the end of her binge, she was passed out and peaceful from the binge drinking, and Agamemnon now had a way to slack her bloodlust without killing anyone. And no matter how many times she drank herself to unconsciousness, Sakmis would always wake up the next day, her thirst for blood strong as ever, and the cafeteria would always provide Sakmis with something red to drink with her meals. Whether it was fruit punch, dyed beard, or blood drained from the slaughtered animals, they made sure Sakmis always had something red to drink. Something that kept her bloodlust under control until they needed her to fight and kill for them. And to this day, Sakmis is still the bloodiest assassin in the long history of Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship, simultaneously a success story and a warning to the staff of Agamemnon's. She is controlled and she is safe to deal with because her meals are carefully planned, And if they weren't, even just for a single day, then she would become a danger to Agamemnon's. Just like how Nonaway became a danger because a teacher decided that they needed to break a hero out of a villain, and how a line cook decided that they didn't need to even read the meal plan, created a monster that still haunts the campus. And while Sakmis is under careful control, it isn't known how many other students are under control because of the meals.